Welcome to Joy in Our Town. I'm your host, Vanessa Rose. So happy that you decided to tune in and join us for another great edition today. Today, we are very happy to be joined by Robert Irvin Brown, and he is an attorney with Ridenour, Heighton, and Lewis. Thank you so much for joining us, Robert.
Thank you, Vanessa. Please call me Bob.
Oh, well, thank you. I will do that, although Robert's a great name. So thank you for joining us today. And before we get started talking, you might want to grab a pen and paper because we have some very interesting information to share with people today that can be really helpful to you if you want to start a nonprofit or a charity or a ministry. That's actually what you do. You're an attorney that practices with those. If you could tell our viewing audience a little bit about yourself.
Sure. This October, I will complete 39 years in practice in Arizona.
Wow.
It went by pretty quickly. I spent my first 5 years doing litigation defense work for big insurance companies, moved into the real estate department, became certified as a specialist in real estate law, and about 15 or 16 years ago, gradually began doing more and more work for nonprofit organizations, including the hospitals in Sun City and Sun City West and their associated real estate companies, to the extent that today I now head the nonprofit practice group at Ridenour, Heighton, and Lewis, which I started about 2 years ago. We have 4 lawyers, and our goal is to serve our faith-based ministries primarily, although we do serve secular charities as well.
Wonderful. So you've been in the state of Arizona for a long time then?
June 1st, 1974. I left Laramie, Wyoming, where I graduated from law school with all my worldly possessions in a U-Haul trailer, never to return.
Wow. Well, I'm sure you've seen Arizona change a lot then. So it's definitely grown a lot since '74. But thank you so much for taking the time to be here today and for sharing this great information we're going to cover with our viewing audience. And for you at home, today we are covering civic affairs. And our first topic is how to start a nonprofit. But before we even get into how to start one, what is a nonprofit?
Great question. Nonprofits can come in a number of different forms. Let's start with the basics. When we think about creating an artificial legal person, we think usually about a corporation, or it could be a limited liability company. To do that, you go to a set of blue books that are called Arizona Revised Statutes, and those are the laws that have been passed by the Arizona legislature and signed into law by the governor usually. And Chapter 10 of those books provides the directions for creating a corporation. You file articles of incorporation with the Arizona Corporation Commission. Their technicians check to make sure you filled out all the information correctly, stamp it approved, and then send it back to you. It's then published with a newspaper in the county where the company is headquartered, and voila, a corporation has been born. That can be in 2 kinds, either for-profit or nonprofit for our purpose. If we're trying to do a charitable organization, or a nonprofit as they're commonly called, we would check the box that says nonprofit. We're halfway home. Now we've got a corporation, and by the way, the principal purpose for having a corporation is to protect the assets of the officers, directors, shareholders, and employees against charges against their personal assets for debts arising from the operation of the company. So the whole idea of a corporation is the corporate shield, and that idea is to allow our society felt that it was a good idea to encourage creation of new businesses and new charities, and to encourage that, we would say to people, look, you don't have to risk all your personal wealth to start a new company.
So if something happens with that company, the people that started the company aren't liable for what happened with the company?
That's right. Okay. That's the essence of the doctrine of limited liability, or often called the corporate shield.
So then you have the corporate shield, but then what would be the benefit of a nonprofit?
Aha. Well, if we want to get the benefit of a nonprofit, and that is that in the classic sense, it's the ability to receive tax-deductible donations. And that means that if you give $1 to your church, for example, you can then turn around, if you're in a 35% tax bracket, and deduct 35 cents off your tax. So in effect, when you give $1 to your church, how much do you really give?
Well, see, I feel like I'm cheating because I know the answer because you told me this earlier, but I didn't know. So that's very interesting. Whenever you give $1, I'm sure you at home probably don't know that answer either, but you're not actually giving $1.
You're really giving 65 cents if you're in that tax bracket, because the IRS gives you 35 cents back off your taxes. So then, in effect, the long arm reaches out of your church's treasury over into the United States Treasury, pulls out 35 cents. So we all know what goes along with government money is government regulation.
Yes.
Well, in the best tradition of the United States government, they regulate the entire dollar, not just the 35 cents. So we might think it's God's money in the church, but the IRS really thinks it's government money.
It's their money.
Exactly. Yeah. And so why that's important is, let's say we were going to start a church. Well, we would first form a corporation, typically, under Arizona law. Then, if we're a church, you automatically qualify under Section 501c3 of the Internal Revenue Code as a charitable organization. So you don't have to file any more paperwork with the government, typically. And there's a whole different set of books called the Internal Revenue Code, and they were passed by the United States Congress. And so that's where we have to look when we have questions about charitable organizations.
So whenever you start a nonprofit, so I was going to ask, how does somebody start one? You first have to go through the state, and then you have to go to federal. So it's a two-step process.
Correct, and that's the typical form would be to start either a corporation or a limited liability company, and then if you're not a church, let's say you're some sort of other charity or parachurch ministry like a food bank or the Red Cross or something like that, you would then look up the rules and regulations in the Internal Revenue Code under Section 501c3. Typically, by the way, there are 20-plus types of 501c organizations. It can be 501c1, C2, C3, C4.
Really? Are they all nonprofits?
They're all versions of charitable organizations, which is actually the correct technical term.
Okay.
The nonprofit word actually comes from Arizona's corporate code, but charitable organization is the word that's primarily seen in the Internal Revenue Code. So let's ignore all the other 501c subtypes and just talk about 501c3. If you're not a church, but you still want to qualify under 501c3, you fill out a document called a Form 1023, which is a fairly lengthy undertaking. If you've never done it before, it's like starting a new hobby. You can do it yourself. The average group that tries that will have that form rejected between 3 and 6 times before the government finally approves it. You ask the Tea Party if you have any questions about that. And
they might have had to do it a few more times than
they
that.
might have had a little more trouble in the normal group, but anyway, it's pretty technical. So we normally recommend hiring either a tax lawyer or a CPA who does a lot of that. And so they fill out your Form 1023, send in a check for, I don't know, it's close to $900 in federal filing fees. Then the IRS takes somewhere now, because of the sequester, it's taking, I think, between 6 months and a year to get those forms approved. If they're filled out properly, then the government will stamp them approved, and they will send you a letter called a determination letter. That's the official letter from the IRS which says, we have determined that you are qualified as a charitable organization to receive tax-deductible donations. And if they didn't like your application, they will either call you on the phone or send you letters back saying, we need more information, this answer is wrong, or whatever.
Now, if you start a charitable organization and through a 501c3 through the government, is there a certain amount of funds that you would receive that have to be used towards something? Or is that something that they don't really regulate once you are approved?
Well, let me reframe your question slightly.
Okay.
One of the key documents is the document that's called the Articles of Incorporation, and that, remember, it's what we filed with the Arizona Corporation Commission. And right near the top of that document is a paragraph called the Purpose Clause, and that's where you've defined what this corporation is legally authorized to do. So, for example, if you said, this corporation is formed to send food to the orphans in Haiti, period, then that's the only thing that corporation can legally do. You could probably take that corporation, go ahead and file a Form 1023 and get approved by the IRS as a charitable organization. 501c3 organizations are basically for charitable, educational, or religious purposes, and clearly this would be a charitable purpose. And so you'd be good to go, except if you then decided you were, instead of sending food to the orphans in Haiti, you were going to build a church in South America, you'd be outside your purpose, you'd be outside your approved IRS determination letter, and you'd have a problem.
Wow, okay, so that's something, it's very specific then.
It can be, or
Okay.
if it was done by professionals who have already made that mistake once,
Or twice.
they will write the purpose clause more broadly.
Okay, so that way it's a bigger umbrella so that you don't come back and get in trouble with the
Exactly.
government.
And that's a classic example of why we recommend that you don't try this at home.
Yes.
Get some professional advice, because there are traps all along the way.
You don't want trouble later. You don't want to be in trouble
Well,
with the
actually,
IRS.
I think some attorneys and accountants like it when you do it yourself first, because it costs more to undo it later.
To undo it and to fix the problem, yes. How do people, if they do have a charitable organization, how do they receive tax-deductible donations? How does that process work?
Well, the actual tax-deductible donations, your organization has to go out and solicit them, and basically persuade people through your appeal to write a check to your organization. Then your organization must, according to the IRS rules and regulations, send a donor acknowledgement letter acknowledging the gift, and that letter has very specific language that must be included in it. And if you fail to put that in, you can lose the donation.
Okay. So interesting. So many things to learn about nonprofit. I know that your information has been at the bottom of the screen. If you have any questions, there's lots of people that can help you, but I know that Bob would also be more than happy to answer any questions you have. I hope that this has been educational for you. We will be right back after this short 30-second message.
We have a job to do out here today.
To be a winning team, you have to work like a winning team.
My team depends on me.
And my team is 50,000 strong. Looks like a lot of work's going into this.
This is what it feels like to be part of a team,
A winning team.
the action team.
Get in on the action at actionteam.org. Are you in?
Welcome back to Joy in Our Town. I'm your host, Vanessa Rose. Thank you so much for staying with us. If you just happened to be joining us, we are here today with Robert Irvin Brown, and he is an attorney with Ridenour, Heighton, and Lewis. I think I said that right.
Perfect.
Thank you so much for staying with us, Bob. And appreciate you being here. Such interesting information we learned about nonprofit organizations and how you can benefit them as a ministry or as a charity. And if you want to reach out and do good for your community, it's something that can be done. So it's not undoable. It's definitely doable as a person. So our second issue, we are speaking about civic affairs, and our topic is working poor tax credit. This is something that has to do with taxes, and tax code is very confusing for the normal person, for the average person. So what is the working poor tax credit?
The state legislature in Arizona, excuse me, is trying to encourage people to give money to help the working poor. And so they said that you can elect to pay up to $400 of your tax bill by giving a gift to an organization that's qualified to receive the working poor tax credit. So literally, if let's say you owed $1,000 to the state of Arizona for your income tax, you could say, I'll write a check to $600 to the state Department of Revenue, and I'll write a check for $400, assuming you're a married couple, to a working poor tax credit qualified company, and you send them the copy of the receipt, and your tax bill's paid.
Wow.
The good news is, it didn't cost you a penny to give that money to the working poor.
Wow. And so you mentioned as a married couple, if you're a single person, is there a maximum that you can give?
$200.
200. So it's 200 per
Right.
person. Okay.
Yeah, and I believe that the legislature recently increased the amount you can give if that company that you give it to happens to be assisting foster children. I haven't seen the regulations on that yet, but I believe it's doubled.
Wow. Well, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
That's a great way for the government finally stepping in and being able to give a hand to people that are helping the poor. Who can benefit from this?
Well, your organization has to go to the Arizona Department of Revenue and file some paperwork and be qualified as a WPTC recipient organization. Historically, that meant people like the food banks, the rescue missions, Teen Challenge, for example, that were doing drug rehab for those kind of organizations. And the key factor was that 51% or more of the revenue that comes into that company has to be spent inside the state of Arizona on people who meet the test for the working poor.
Wow.
So it's a fairly targeted activity that has to be, or for which this money has to be spent. That also meant that churches typically did not qualify because more than or less than 51% of their total receipts would be spent to assist the working poor. Working with a local CPA, Monica Stern, who specializes in auditing nonprofit organizations, in the last year we were able to develop a program which will enable a typical church to qualify to receive working poor tax credit money. And it's a tremendous benefit to their benevolence fund because, in effect, their members can now redirect money that they were going to pay the state of Arizona as their tax bill and instead put it in the benevolence fund.
Wow. So this is something that not everybody's church is qualified, or is everyone's church qualified?
Well, none of the churches are qualified unless they go through the process of, the way we do it is form a separate limited liability company in which the church is the sole member, and then that company, which will contact someone who knows how to fill out those applications and file the application with the Arizona Department of Revenue, receive the certification, and then they're good to go.
So basically a church, so if somebody had a ministry and they wanted to participate in this and qualify, they would go through a professional and start a separate entity from their church that would be directed toward maybe ministry, going out to the streets and feeding people and doing things for people.
Classic example. That would work.
So that would be so any church, anyone that has a ministry can try to apply for this. And
yes, and if you have questions, you can also go to the Department of Revenue's website. They have information there that describes the technical details, or give me a call, and I'll direct you to someone who can assist in evaluating whether your church would be able to qualify. But I would say most churches that have a benevolence activity that helps people who meet the test for being a working poor will not have a problem qualifying.
wow, because I know that so many churches here in the Valley have outreach programs that go out and help people and feed people. And
absolutely. And the amount of money, I don't have a current statistic, but it's a relatively small amount of money that has been donated to the Working Poor Tax Credit Program.
Wow.
So it's a large untapped pool of funds for our churches to be able to help the poor.
Wow. So if somebody is watching, though, they do need to be aware that their church doesn't just qualify. They need to find out.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay. And so if they are watching, how should they approach their pastor or the person in charge of their ministry and address it with them?
I would say politely. You might just want to say, Pastor, there are some relatively new developments that you might not be aware of, and then have them contact me. Monica Stern is a good example. Who she's very familiar with the details. Or take a look at the Arizona Department of Revenue's website, and that will give you some basic information.
So whenever an organization or a church receives this, is this something that they have any responsibility to the state government for? Or is this completely and totally free of?
Oh, Vanessa, you're becoming so cynical for such a young age. Yes, as a matter of fact, every organization who becomes certified to receive those funds should expect to be audited by the state within 2 to 3 years to make sure that they are spending 51% of their money for people who do qualify for the working poor.
So how would they qualify the working poor? How is that, if they went out and did an outreach to people, how do they go about qualifying those people?
It's not a terribly burdensome process, but it does involve some paperwork. And we've developed it's essentially a one-page sheet that you have the potential recipient fill out.
So it's just, you're benefiting the public by taking money that would go to the government, but it's going to go help people directly.
Correct. And the government felt it was a good idea because the money's going directly to the working poor, and they don't have to create a new government bureaucracy to fund the money.
Which is a great
you know,
idea.
to administer it. Yeah.
That is, you're leaving it to the people to help people instead of the government growing larger,
Exactly,
which
yes.
it's always a good thing to allow people to help each other. Is this a permanent thing that's here, or is this something that can change with the legislature, or is this something that was voted on, or?
The state legislature passed the law
Okay.
to allow it, and so the state legislature could pass another law to disallow it. But
Okay.
as far as we know, there is no current movement to repeal it.
And is this only in Arizona?
Yes.
Is there any other states that do this, or?
That I do not know. I have not
Okay.
done a search of the other state laws.
Okay, so whenever you are participating in the working poor tax credit, this only applies to state taxes?
That's right.
So as far as federal taxes go, is there something that you can implement to help with the working poor that goes towards federal taxes, or is that separate?
Let me qualify that a little bit. If you did make a $400 donation to a working poor tax credit company in Arizona,
Yes.
that would also qualify as a deduction on your federal taxes. But
Okay.
it's a deduction on your taxes, your federal taxes, not a tax credit.
Okay,
The tax credit is the best kind of gift you can get from the government because it literally pays, a $1 donation pays $1 worth of taxes.
wow,
And if it's just a deduction, it's just a reduction of your income by $1.
okay.
But then you still have to pay tax on
So
what's
you still
left.
have to pay it, okay,
If you remember our discussion at the first part of the program, we talked about 65 cents. If you make a $1 donation,
yes.
you actually give 65 cents and the government gives 35 cents. The value of a $1 deduction to you is only 35 cents.
Wow,
Whereas a tax credit, the value of that dollar is $1.
okay, so it's more beneficial then to have
The tax credit.
the tax credit.
Yeah.
Taxes or something.
Yeah, let's. I'm afraid some of our listeners have just fallen asleep. So
They're a little confused. I'm a little confused. Fortunately, they have accountants for that. So I think that's the one class I ever failed in college was accounting. I've never failed anything in my life, but accounting was not my forte. So this is something that is beneficial. So what has been your reaction whenever you talk to pastors and to people? Are they open to this? Is this something that they are nervous about? What has been your general feel of people that you've spoken with about this?
with all due reverence and respect to our pastors, they have so many things on their to-do list already. Their eyes glaze over about 30 seconds into the discussion. If they're
Mention
still awake
paperwork.
after 1 minute, then they say, you probably ought to talk to our business administrator.
Okay.
But yeah, no, it really eventually I think will be a tremendous program. It's going to take a few years for the message to get out and for us to be able to have good working examples of churches and to show how much they raised. But really, any church that has a very active benevolence program should be considering this.
Wonderful. Well, Bob, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh,
It
you're
has
welcome,
been really great. But before we stop, you wrote a book. And we wanted to show that. I don't think we showed that.
No,
so.
we didn't. Sure, we'd be glad to. My son and I wrote a book called Legal Realities, The Silent Threats to Ministries, and it was designed to just raise the awareness of our pastors and our board members and business administrators about the dangers of America's litigation system as it's currently impacting our churches and our charities.
Wow.
And there's also a chapter about church violence. So it's a real eye-opener. It's not very technical, and it's got Appendix A is full of my favorite stupid lawsuits.
Couldn't you fill a whole book with that?
You probably could.
2-inch book.
My favorite one was the lady who sued Air Canada for $5 million because they lost her 18-year-old cat.
Oh, my Lord. Wow. Well, that must have been a very special cat.
Yes.
Did she win?
No.
Okay, well, that's good news. Well, thank you again so much for joining us, Bob. Thank you so much at home for watching. We hope that this has been educational, informational for you, and we look forward to seeing you here next time on Joy in Our Town.